16th century France was a time of great transformation. Political and religious crises left deep marks on society, and the poor suffered abandonment and misery. It was in this turbulent setting that one of the greatest defenders of the poor and marginalized was born, Saint Vincent de Paul, whose heart was profoundly touched by the gospel and the needs of the less fortunate. Vincent de Paul was born on April 24, 1581, in the small village of Pouy, in southwestern France. The son of peasants, he understood the simple life of the countryside from an early age. His family was modest but deeply religious, which provided young Vincent with a strong foundation in the Catholic faith. The hard life of the peasants and the need to survive shaped his youth, and his parents soon noticed his intelligence, sending him to study with the Franciscans in Dax. Young Vincent excelled in his studies, and realizing that education was his opportunity to progress, he decided to pursue the priesthood. At 19, he was ordained a priest, but he still had much to learn about what it truly meant to be a shepherd of souls. At that time, his vision of the priesthood was more focused on seeking a comfortable social position than on true service to others. At the beginning of his ministry, Saint Vincent de Paul sought a life of prestige and financial security, something common among many young priests of his time. However, God had other plans for him. A crucial event in his life was his capture by Turkish pirates while traveling from Marseille to Narbonne. He was taken as a slave to North Africa, an experience that marked him deeply. Before continuing with this video, I would like to invite you to reflect with us on our spiritual life as Catholics. Many times, in the hustle and bustle of everyday life, we set prayer aside, even though we know how important it is for our spiritual life. With this in mind, I have created an ebook called Prayer Routine for Catholics. In it, I share simple and effective ways to integrate prayer into your daily life, bringing more serenity and closeness to God. This material is a valuable companion for those who wish to live their faith more intensely and consistently. The link to the ebook is in the first comment of this video. Click the link and receive your ebook right now. May God bless you. During his captivity, Vincent became closely acquainted with the suffering of slavery and the dehumanization with which Christians were treated in Muslim lands. It was during this period that he began to understand the true nature of service and charity. After 2 years in captivity, he managed to escape and return to France, where this experience transformed him internally. Now, more than ever, he felt the urgency to dedicate his life to serving God and the poor. After his release, Vincent de Paul was sent to Paris, where he served as chaplain and tutor in the household of the Gondi family, one of the most influential in France. Through this position, he had his first real contact with the French aristocracy. But instead of being dazzled by wealth and power, Saint Vincent began to perceive the extreme need of the peasants and poor workers living under the exploitation of the elites. The great turning point in Saint Vincent's life occurred during a mission on the Gondi family's estates. He heard the confession of a gravely ill peasant, who revealed that he had never had access to the sacraments, and Saint Vincent felt God's call to dedicate his life to evangelizing the poor. This episode was a watershed in his life, as Vincent understood that the priesthood was not just a function but a true mission to serve the marginalized. From then on, Saint Vincent de Paul began organizing missions to bring the sacraments and the Word of God to villages and rural communities. He realized that the clergy of the time were largely unprepared and uninterested in attending to the spiritual and material needs of the people, which deeply troubled him. Thus, Vincent founded the Congregation of the Mission, a community of priests dedicated to preaching to the poor and reforming the clergy's life. One of Saint Vincent's most notable traits was his ability to inspire others to join his cause. He had a clear vision of the need to involve all sectors of society in serving the poor, and with this, he formed the famous Ladies of Charity, composed of women from high society who, under his guidance, dedicated themselves to caring for the sick, orphans, and abandoned. But Saint Vincent de Paul's work was not limited to material assistance. He deeply believed in the dignity of every person, created in God's image and likeness, and insisted that Christian love should not only be financial aid but a true encounter with others, recognizing their humanity and sharing their pain. In 1633, Vincent found a great collaborator in Louise de Marillac, a young widow who shared his passion for serving those in need. Together, they founded the Daughters of Charity, a congregation of sisters who, unlike traditional orders, did not live cloistered in convents but went out into the streets to serve the poor, sick, and marginalized directly. Saint Vincent de Paul's vision was radical for its time. He believed that the Church had a direct responsibility to the poor and that priests and lay people should work together to alleviate the suffering of the most vulnerable. His charitable efforts spread throughout France and beyond, creating a network of services and support for the poor that included hospitals, orphanages, schools, and shelters for the most vulnerable. Vincent was also deeply concerned about the formation of priests. He saw how distant the clergy were from the people's reality and how unprepared they were to deal with the spiritual and social issues of their time. For this reason, he founded seminaries and training houses where future priests not only studied theology but were also formed in the practice of serving the poor and living out the gospel. Among the most outstanding moments in Saint Vincent de Paul's life were his encounters with the poor, whom he spoke to not only as a priest but as a friend and brother. He saw Christ in every suffering face, and this moved him to limitless compassion. His reputation for holiness began to spread throughout France, and many sought his help and counsel, both poor and rich. Saint Vincent de Paul's humility was one of his most impressive virtues. Although he was called to play important roles within the Church and society, he never allowed pride to take over. On the contrary, he always attributed his achievements to God's grace and considered himself only a useless servant before the immensity of divine love. The last years of his life were marked by intense work and dedication. Even with his health weakened, he continued to supervise the numerous charitable works he had initiated, and his concern for the poor never diminished. Saint Vincent believed that serving the needy was a concrete way of serving Christ, and that kept him active until the end of his days. Saint Vincent de Paul died on September 27, 1660, at the age of 79. His death was deeply felt throughout France, but his legacy of love and service continued to grow, inspired by his words and actions. He was canonized by the Church in 1737, and his example of charity and devotion to the gospel remains a source of inspiration for Catholics around the world. Saint Vincent de Paul's legacy goes far beyond his time. His congregations, such as the Daughters of Charity and the Vincentian Fathers, continue to play a fundamental role in assisting the poor worldwide. Moreover, his influence on the Catholic Church's social thought was profound, helping shape the social doctrine that affirms the dignity of every human being and the responsibility of all to help the needy. One of the greatest miracles of Saint Vincent de Paul's life was the transformation of hearts. He not only fed the hungry and cared for the sick but also changed how society viewed the poor. For him, charity was not merely almsgiving but a recognition of each person's dignity and worth, especially the most vulnerable. Today, Saint Vincent is known as the Apostle of Charity, and his name is synonymous with compassion and service. His works have influenced countless charitable initiatives over the centuries, including the Society of Saint Vincent de Paul, founded by Frederick Ozanam in the 19th century, which continues his mission of helping the poor to this day. After his death, Saint Vincent de Paul's impact did not diminish. In fact, his work grew, and the Vincentian spirit spread worldwide, influencing generations of Christians to serve the poor with the same zeal and love he demonstrated. A clear example of this is the Society of Saint Vincent de Paul, founded by Frederick Ozanam in 1833, which followed in the saint's footsteps, promoting aid to the needy in over 150 countries. In addition to the society, the congregations founded by Saint Vincent and Louise de Marillac, such as the Daughters of Charity and the Mission Priests, continue to be forces of evangelization and assistance to the poor. They are present in various nations, helping in diverse contexts of poverty and social exclusion. Saint Vincent's vision that Christian love must be manifested in concrete actions remains alive in the works he inspired. Another aspect that must be highlighted is how Saint Vincent de Paul understood suffering. He did not see the poor merely as objects of pity but as subjects who bore the image of Christ. For him, serving the needy was a privilege, a way to meet and serve Christ himself. This led him to treat every person with dignity and respect, regardless of their social status. Throughout his life, Saint Vincent de Paul developed a deep love for the Eucharist. He saw in the real presence of Christ the spiritual nourishment that sustained his works of charity. Celebrating Mass was the moment when he connected most intensely with the Lord and received the strength to continue his mission. This love for the Eucharist was passed on to the members of the congregations he founded so that they always kept their focus on the centrality of Christ in their works. The miracles attributed to Saint Vincent de Paul are not limited to the period when he was alive. Many graces and healings were recorded after his death, especially through the intercession of his relics. His canonization in 1737 was a recognition of the profound impact he had on the Church and society, and of his holiness, evidenced not only by his acts but by his spirituality. Saint Vincent de Paul never sought fame or personal recognition. His only desire was to serve God and the poor with faithfulness. This humility is one of the reasons why his legacy is so enduring. He understood that true charity came from God and that he was merely an instrument in the Lord's hands. This kept him always aware of his human frailty and dependent on divine grace. One of the great challenges that Saint Vincent faced was the prejudice and discrimination that the poor suffered. Before continuing with this video, I would like to invite you to reflect with us on our spiritual life as Catholics. Many times, in the hustle and bustle of everyday life, we set prayer aside, even though we know how important it is for our spiritual life. With this in mind, I have created an ebook called Prayer Routine for Catholics. In it, I share simple and effective ways to integrate prayer into your daily life, bringing more serenity and closeness to God. This material is a valuable companion for those who wish to live their faith more intensely and consistently. The link to the ebook is in the first comment of this video. Click the link and receive your ebook right now. May God bless you. In 17th century France, many viewed the needy as responsible for their own misery, believing that poverty was a sign of sin or personal failure. Saint Vincent, with his deep compassion and understanding of the gospel, fought against this view, teaching that the poor were, in fact, God's favorites and that serving them was an obligation for all Christians. Saint Vincent de Paul was also a great advocate for clergy reform. He saw the urgent need for priests to be men of prayer and pastoral dedication. To this end, he created retreats and training programs for priests, especially those working in rural areas. He wanted priests to be true shepherds, committed to the spiritual and material well-being of their flock. Throughout his life, Saint Vincent was an advisor to kings, nobles, and ecclesiastical leaders. Despite his humble origins, he had practical wisdom and deep spirituality that attracted people from all social strata. However, he never allowed these relationships to distance him from the poor, as he always remembered that his primary mission was to serve the most needy, not to seek prestige or political influence. Vincent de Paul saw poverty as an opportunity to encounter Christ. He said that the poor are our teachers because they teach us the value of humility, dependence on God, and the true joy that comes from detachment from material things. This vision changed how many saw the poor and helped create a new social consciousness within the Church. The impact of Saint Vincent de Paul on the Church's social doctrine is undeniable. He anticipated many of the principles that would later be formalized in Catholic social doctrine, such as the dignity of the human person, solidarity, and the preferential option for the poor. His life and work remain a living example of how the Catholic faith can transform society when authentically lived. Saint Vincent de Paul never strayed from his deep life of prayer. Although constantly involved in activities, he knew that without prayer and union with God, his works would be empty. This balance between action and contemplation was one of the characteristics that made him such an extraordinary saint. He knew that charity without prayer would become mere activism, and prayer without charity would be sterile. Another notable aspect of Saint Vincent's life was his love for the sick. He not only cared about the physical health of the sick but also for their souls. He frequently visited the sick himself, bringing them the sacraments and comforting them with his presence. He said that the sick were the altar of Christ, where the sacrifice of love should be offered. One of the miracles attributed to Saint Vincent de Paul involves an inexplicable healing. A young girl, gravely ill and on the brink of death, was healed after her family asked for the saint's intercession. The testimony of this healing was investigated by the Church and recognized as one of the miracles that contributed to his canonization. For Saint Vincent, every miracle was a testament to God's goodness and mercy, and he always attributed all graces to the Lord. Saint Vincent de Paul was also known for his patience and serenity in the face of adversity. Amidst crises, financial difficulties, and even disagreements within the Church itself, he remained calm and trusted in divine providence. That trust was the fruit of a life entirely dedicated to God, in which he learned that everything is in the Creator's hands and that, at the right time, God's will would always prevail. The example of Saint Vincent de Paul is particularly relevant today when social inequalities continue to grow, and the poor are often forgotten. He reminds us that Christian charity must be the foundation of all our actions, and that true love for our neighbor is manifested in caring for the weakest and most marginalized. Another inspiring aspect of his life was his ability to forgive. Vincent faced many calumnies and misunderstandings throughout his life but always responded with humility and forgiveness. He saw every attack as an opportunity to imitate Christ, who suffered unjustly but never stopped loving his enemies. Saint Vincent de Paul lived in a time of deep divisions within the Church, especially during the 30 Years' War. However, he was a tireless promoter of unity and peace. He believed that charity should be the foundation of human relationships and that only through fraternal love would true peace be achieved. His love for the Church was unwavering. Although aware of the institution's flaws and internal problems, he always worked to reform it from within, with faithfulness and respect. For Saint Vincent, the Church was the bride of Christ, and it was a privilege to serve her by caring for her most needy children. When Saint Vincent de Paul passed away in 1660, he left a legacy that transcended his time. His life was a living testimony of what it means to be truly Christian, to love God above all things and to serve one's neighbor with compassion and humility. He was an example of how God's love can transform the world. After his death, Saint Vincent de Paul's body was buried in the chapel of the Mother House of the Congregation of the Mission in Paris. Years later, during the canonization process, his body was exhumed and found incorrupt, a sign to many of his sanctity. Although his body was reinterred, his heart was preserved as a relic and is still venerated today. This symbolizes the tireless love he had for the poor and for Christ. The incorruptibility of his body was seen as an additional miracle and inspired even more devotion to the saint. Relics of Saint Vincent were distributed to various churches, and his veneration quickly spread across Europe and the world. For many, he became the perfect example of how faith can be lived in a concrete way, through acts of charity that reflect God's love. During his lifetime, Vincent de Paul never sought notoriety. His only concern was to serve the poor in the Church. However, his holiness was so evident that even before his death, he was already considered a saint by many who lived with him. The official canonization in 1737 was merely the formal recognition of what the people had believed for a long time. Saint Vincent de Paul was a living example of love for God and neighbor. The canonization of Saint Vincent de Paul was a great event for the Catholic Church, as it recognized one of the greatest defenders of the poor and marginalized in Christian history. His life was a testimony that the gospel is not only a message to be preached but a reality to be lived daily, especially in caring for the needy. Saint Vincent de Paul's influence extends to this day. In addition to the works that continue to be carried out by the Vincentian congregations and the Society of Saint Vincent de Paul, his spirituality has inspired countless other orders and movements within the Church. He is considered the patron of all charitable works and remains a model of how to live the Catholic faith in a practical and transformative way. Saint Vincent's motto, "Love in Action," resonates in every one of his works. He knew that Christian love could not be merely theoretical but must be lived through service. This concrete approach to faith is what set him apart and made him one of the most beloved and respected saints of the Church. He understood that love without action is empty, and that by serving the poor, we serve Christ himself. Devotion to Saint Vincent de Paul grew significantly after his canonization, and many churches were built in his honor. Moreover, his image began to be frequently represented in paintings and sculptures, usually beside the poor, sick, or children, symbolizing his tireless work of charity. These artistic representations are visual reminders of his dedication and are venerated worldwide. One of Saint Vincent de Paul's most powerful legacies was his ability to mobilize others in the cause of the poor. He not only performed great works of charity personally but also formed entire communities dedicated to service. By involving lay people, women, and religious, he created a network of charity that became a transformative force in the society of his time and continues to impact the world today. In addition to the Daughters of Charity and the Vincentian Fathers, another important movement inspired by Saint Vincent was the Society of Saint Vincent de Paul. Founded by Frederick Ozanam, the society is composed of lay Catholics who follow the saint's teachings, visiting the poor in their homes and offering direct assistance. Ozanam, in creating the society, believed that Saint Vincent de Paul was the perfect model of Christian action and charity. The Society of Saint Vincent de Paul quickly spread to various countries and is now present in thousands of communities around the world. It continues to carry forward the Vincentian spirit of love for one's neighbor, especially the most needy, inspiring new generations to live Christian charity in an active and transformative way. The spiritual legacy of Saint Vincent de Paul also had a profound impact on the Church's theology and pastoral care. He was one of the pioneers in understanding that serving the poor is not only a matter of social justice but also of spiritual salvation. For him, caring for the needy was a way of living the gospel and preparing the way for the kingdom of God. Saint Vincent also taught that service to the poor must be done with humility and respect. He often told his followers that they should treat the poor as their teachers, learning from them and serving them with love. This attitude was revolutionary in a time when the poor were frequently despised and marginalized, and it remains a powerful message today. Vincent de Paul was always a man of deep prayer. He knew that without union with God, all his charitable work would be in vain. Therefore, he encouraged all members of his congregations to maintain a constant life of prayer. For him, action and contemplation were not opposites but complementary. Prayer gave strength for service, and service was a concrete expression of prayer. Another important lesson Saint Vincent left was that charity must be organized. He believed that disorganized charity could cause more harm than good, and therefore he developed methods and structures to ensure that the poor were cared for effectively and with dignity. This vision led to the creation of enduring institutions that continue to operate to this day. Saint Vincent's unconditional love for the poor reflected his conviction that every person is a creation of God, deserving of respect and dignity. He believed there was no problem that love and charity could not overcome. For him, poverty was not just a material lack but an opportunity to find Christ in life's most challenging situations. Another notable point in his life was his relationship with Louise de Marillac. Together, they formed an alliance that revolutionized how women participated in religious life and service to the poor. Louise became the co-founder of the Daughters of Charity and helped expand Saint Vincent's mission beyond the borders of France. This collaboration shows the importance of teamwork and mutual support in the Christian mission. Over the years, Saint Vincent de Paul has been recognized as one of the greatest examples of holiness in action. His life was not marked by great supernatural miracles but by a life of constant charity and dedication to others. He demonstrated that true holiness lies in doing good in small, everyday acts, always with love and compassion. His example of life continues to inspire not only Catholics but people of all beliefs. The spirit of service he embodied transcends religious and cultural boundaries, showing that love for one's neighbor is a universal language. Many non-Catholic charitable organizations also draw inspiration from his teachings to help the needy in their communities. Today, the world continues to face enormous social challenges, such as extreme poverty, inequality, and exclusion. Saint Vincent de Paul's example is more relevant than ever. He reminds us that as Christians, we have a responsibility to act, to be the hands and feet of Christ in the world, caring for those who suffer and bringing hope to the hopeless. His life teaches us that true greatness lies not in power or wealth but in humble and loving service to others. He frequently said that love is inventive to infinity, and that inventiveness can be seen in all the works he initiated. Whether creating new ways to help the poor, mobilizing society, or reforming the clergy, Saint Vincent always found creative ways to live the gospel. Saint Vincent de Paul remains an accessible model of holiness. He did not live isolated in a convent or in a world of elevated spirituality but in the midst of people, facing everyday problems with faith and courage. He shows us that anyone can achieve holiness, regardless of social position or abilities, as long as they live with love and dedication to God. Reflecting on the life of Saint Vincent, it is impossible not to feel inspired to do more for others. He firmly believed that faith without works is dead, and that every Christian has the duty to transform the world around them, starting with small acts of kindness. His message is a powerful reminder that everyone has the power to make a difference, no matter how small their contribution may seem. For today's Christians, Saint Vincent de Paul offers a guiding light in times of uncertainty and division. He demonstrated that even in the midst of the greatest crises, such as the 30 Years' War and the endemic poverty of France in his time, it is possible to find ways to serve and bring hope. He believed in divine providence and knew that with faith, all difficulties could be overcome. His missionary zeal is also an example for the Church worldwide. Saint Vincent never limited himself to one region or a specific group of people. He saw the world as a mission field and believed that every person was worthy of receiving God's love. This universalist vision is a call for all of us, reminding us that our mission as Christians knows no borders. In the final moments of his life, Vincent de Paul was surrounded by those he had inspired and formed. He left this world with the certainty that his work would continue in the hands of many others. His trust was in God and in those he had guided along the way. His death was a celebration of a life lived in fullness, always with a heart turned toward others. The message of Saint Vincent de Paul lives on, not only in his congregations and the Society of Saint Vincent de Paul but also in the hearts of all those inspired by his life and teachings. He teaches us that true happiness lies in service, and that by helping others, we find the deepest meaning of our own existence. Saint Vincent invites us to be creative in love, to find new ways to serve, and to never give up in the face of difficulties. He believed that with God's help, anything is possible, and that charity must always be active, always in motion. He challenges us to be innovative in our response to the world's problems, always driven by love for Christ and our neighbor. Looking at the example of Saint Vincent de Paul, we are called to step out of our comfort zones and do something for the most needy. He reminds us that charity is not an option but a Christian obligation, a manifestation of our faith in action. If we follow his example, we can transform the world, one act of love at a time. Saint Vincent's impact is eternal, as his works and teachings continue to influence millions of people. He shows us that true holiness is within everyone's reach and that each small act of charity can have eternal consequences. His legacy is a testament to the power of God's love, which can transform lives and bring light to the world. The story of this great saint is a living example of the gospel in action. His life was a constant yes to God's call to love and serve. He did not settle for preaching Christian love. He lived it in every act, in every encounter with the poor and marginalized. May his life continue to inspire us to follow the same path of service and unconditional love for Christ and our neighbor. Saint Vincent de Paul, pray for us.